Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep, and your host for this podcast. In each episode, I ask my guests a profound question. Whose life story from your own family would you most want to see documented on film? My guests share stories of both living and deceased family members, revealing the remarkable lives that have shaped their own. This show is an extension of our mission at StoryKeep, where we partner with families of wealth to preserve their histories through legacy films and private podcasts. Since 2010, we've had the privilege of working with over 100 families, capturing their unique narratives for future generations. In this podcast, I engage in meaningful conversations with fascinating people, exploring the surprising histories and significant stories of their loved ones. By delving into these particular histories, I think we uncover some universal themes. We often wait way too long to capture the stories of those we love, but through these conversations, we elevate and celebrate the enduring influence of one person's life. I hope that you'll leave this episode inspired to think more deeply about your story and the legacy you're creating. Today, I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Dirk Jungé. With over 30 years of leadership in the family office world, Dirk's been a driving force in the industry. As the former chairman and CEO of Pitcairn, he helped transform his family's business into a global leader in wealth management. But Dirk's story is way more than numbers. He's a fourth-generation member of the Pitcairn family, which means that he has faced the same questions that a lot of successful families wrestle with. How do we divide the wealth fairly among future generations without losing the integrity of the family business? And how do you make sure that the legacy stays intact? Back in 1987, he helped tackle these issues and shifted their family into managing the wealth of other families and protecting their future generations. Outside of the office, Dirk has many passions, including motorcycling, adventuring, helicoptering, and camping off the grid. You could find him almost anywhere. He recently got back from a 5,800-mile journey all the way to Alaska. He has a new book out, Preserving Multi-Generational Wealth, How to Lead a Flourishing Family Enterprise, and it outlines 7 lessons for successful families. The first one is spreading the family story. Please grab a seat and let's spend some time with Dirk as he shares some of the lessons that he has learned from his dad, James, and some of his fondest memories with his old man. Let's dive in. So, Dirk, it is wonderful to be with you. I've been really looking forward to this conversation and maybe just spending time with you, to be honest, because I've watched a few other podcasts with you, and your enthusiasm for life is contagious. So thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you.
Yeah. So on the show, we ask this sort of profound question. I think it's a profound question, which is, whose life story from your own family would you most want to have documented on film? And I think the story of actually where you are physically sitting right now is a great place to start the answer to that question. So could you situate us and tell us about, you've got a portrait in the back. Tell us about where you are.
Okay, thanks a lot, and looking forward to this podcast. So I am right now sitting in what was the bull pen of a dairy barn that my grandmother had, where she was supplying dairy products to the whole hamlet of Brenathan. And when Dad retired, he decided to take this bullpen, and I helped him walnut panel it so it was his office. But when I got my turn at the piñata, I've turned it into a man cave where I have great cigars, bourbon, and lots of sports. So I think place is important, and the fact that it was my grandmother's dream to have a dairy farm for this community that I live in is special.
Yeah. So I have to say I was really intrigued when you answered the question to this question about who you would want to document, whose life story, being your dad, James.
Yeah.
because you're a fourth generation Pitcairn family member, and that is sort of the brand name, the sort of the family of prominence, let's say, which is your mom's side. And your dad was sort of an in-law outlaw, as we say. Am I right on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the contrast for him coming from such humble background and the fact that he ends up basically being the first non-blood family leader in the Pitcairn family enterprise is special. And the fact that I believe that if it weren't for his good leadership, where he took the family's principal asset, which was PPG Industries, formerly Pittsburgh Plate Glass, when it had done a nosedive for a whole decade, he was the representative of the Pitcairn control block that came in and revitalized and launched it back as a growth company. And once that was in place, then he was able to sell blocks of PPG and bring it back and turn it into a first-class diversified investment holding company. So I grew up learning from an engineer who had become an investor, and he was fantastic at strategic planning and recognizing which levers led to successful businesses over time. So would you like me to talk a little bit about his humble background?
Yeah, I do. So I want to take us back because, of course, all those things are very impressive. But he, if I'm not mistaken, his dad died when he was just 8.
Correct. And that was 1929. And
right
his mother,
before the crash.
And his mother was a portrait artist. And if you can imagine that it's difficult to have any type of income as a portrait artist back in the Great Depression, my dad actually grew up with his great aunties, a nurse and 2 teachers, and that was really instructive to him as an early age. When he was 8 and 9, he was working a depression garden for the community of Glenview, Illinois, and so he learned that food during the tough times was essential, and that his living with his aunties provided him firsthand to see how productive a young person could be in helping deal with something as basic as food during the Great Depression.
So is it his humble beginnings that would make you want to have documented his life story on film? Is that sort of what you're most curious about? Like what of that era is still left a mystery to you or still a curiosity for you?
What I saw was that he didn't let his humble beginnings take away from him doing his life's ambition of being an engineer, but then becoming an unbelievable corporate leader. And I think his humble background is important, but having chosen to follow in his footsteps at Pitcairn and being around family systems my whole life, the difficulty of senior generations transitioning to the next generation is often where families come unwound. Well, he was excellent in understanding the importance of really developing both levels of generational interplay. And when I think about what he was he was someone who valued hard work his whole life. And so I saw that even though he came from humble backgrounds, it didn't in fact keep him from being very successful and very productive member of society. But I think even further is being around family systems my whole life, I recognize how unique it is to have had my father be my mentor, my best friend, my business partner, my role model, and someone who trusted me with so much responsibility at an early age. I can't even believe all the things that he was willing to have me step into. So that's a very special relationship.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, had you gone to him and said, "Hey, Dad, we'd like to," I don't know if you did document his life story in any way, but if you went to him and said, "I'd like to, film you talking about your life story," how do you think he would have responded to that invitation?
A little bit humbly and a little bit shy, but I'm pretty persuasive. And I think that, I think that he's seen the benefit of my videographer and capturing history of the family at different times. I think he probably would have acquiesced. But actually, that's a very interesting thing, because one of my nieces, after my mother had passed, recognized that Dad was aging, and she was very close to him, but went and did a oral history. So maybe with something like this as a companion piece to some of the oral history that she has documented and saved would be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any parts of who he was or what motivated him or just eras of his life? Is there anything left that you would really want to have somebody ask him about, that you would have really wanted to know more about your dad? You knew a lot about him, it seems, and you worked, side by side with him. But is there anything where you thought, I never really knew about this, or what he thought about a certain thing?
It's a really interesting question, and I think the reason why I chose him with all the different aspects of our relationship, we didn't leave anything unsaid. You know how special that is? Because so many people, when they lose a parent, have that regret. And I don't have a regret. And I think it's because we shared so many different things. One of the things that I was thinking about getting ready for this podcast was, at age 13, our nuclear family and some uncles and aunts and their kids that were teenagers were planning a trip to Switzerland and Italy. No internet, no Google. And so he introduced me to a travel agent. And at age 13, I arranged a 2-week awesome trip, if I do say so myself, to Switzerland and Italy, where I had to learn multiple currencies. I had to understand the back of the house of a hotel. I had to basically make sure that the venues and the restaurants and the wine lists were all up to par. And so just think about that. As a 13-year-old, he trusted me and handed it over to me, and so many different things in life. In his later life, I persuaded him to join me in business partnership with a chartered helicopter business. My day job was Pitcairn, but my night job was Helicopter Services, Inc. The reason I turned it into a business was because I had to have people help support my habit. It was expensive. And so I remember this. I think it was like after having this business for 8 years, and we always did an annual review. He and I were the two shareholders, so we had our business meeting. And at the end of that business meeting, there was always a capital call. We're 50-50 partners. So I think it was the 8th year we go through the year in review and the financials, and then there was another capital call that was part of the closing. And Dad said to me very wisely, he said, "Dirk, things that I like to do and cost money, I call a hobby." I said, "Dad, what are you trying to tell me?" He said, "You have a full-time job at Pitcairn. Why are you the president of this operation that's costing us money every year. You know what you should do? You should make the lead pilot the president, and you should offer him 40% of the profits. Since we never make a profit, no big deal. But actually, that wisdom allowed me to do a better job for Pitcairn. And guess what? We turned it into a thriving organization just with that.
I can imagine. Wow. This leads me to wonder if there were little sayings or ways of kind of putting things that you remember about him when you would get into a pickle or something challenging.
Well, that's a pretty broad subject, but I'm going to start with one experience. I've always been about life has lots of experiences and you should touch as many as you can. So it was not always that I was a good boy.
So I can't imagine. I cannot imagine that, Dirk.
Dad traveled a lot, but when there was a issue that had to be dealt with as a parent, for him, he developed this habit. He'd tell me after dinner, Dirk, meet me in the library. So the library had two couches facing each other. He would get in one, and invariably, because what his approach is he would say, Dirk, do you have something to tell me about? Well, I may have done 3 or 4 things that I wasn't very proud of, and he would basically take a nap if I wasn't forthcoming, and he would stay there for 2 or 3 hours until I would own up. So he would find out about all kinds of things that I hadn't been a good boy about. So I called that the library talks. But what that meant was...
How was that to be on the receiving end of? Do you remember did you feel on the spot, or did you feel kind of comfortable, or what did you feel like?
Well, invariably, after disclosing something that wasn't even on his radar screen and having to deal with the repercussions of that, I actually learned it as a parenting approach that's pretty good. But then I'd say that in terms of things that lasted with me, my grandfather, Raymond Pitcairn, my mom's dad, was credited with being the person who convinced Eisenhower to go from the military to seek the highest office in the land. And so I grew up thinking that everybody's grandparents had the president and his wife drop in on a regular basis. Well, so Eisenhower was a very important person in my life. I actually photobombed him when I think I was 8 years old. And Dad said that he was committed to the Eisenhower principle, which, if you don't know what that is, as a military leader, he had traveled to, I think, 80 different bases. And the Eisenhower principle was he wanted to leave people, places, and things in better shape than he found them. And that was his dad's life's work. So the Eisenhower principle was very important to Dad, and I tried to have that be an important philosophy for me in my life. And then there were 2 others. I think you know that the members of the Pitcairn family are affiliated with a small Christian faith called Swedenborgian, or
I do know.
short course that to be the New Church. And Dad's 2 favorite doctrines were the doctrines of charity and the doctrines of use. And I think most people understand the doctrine of charity is if you're in a position where you've been very blessed and successful, your obligation is to, in fact, do that for others. But the doctrine of use, a little bit less clear, is it doesn't matter what your career, what your job is, do it to the best of your ability. So a waste management driver of a truck, as long as he's doing it industriously and thoughtfully, that's the doctrine of use. So those two are very important.
I suppose that he then really treated most people with utmost respect, whoever he was engaging with.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of one thing additionally about Dad and his judgment. When he was at the University of Illinois during World War II, and he graduated number one in his class as a chemie, University of Illinois Engineering School, and he put himself through college by washing dishes at 3 different fraternities. When he came out, he was a golf research person, and during that time and during the war, Dad had very bad eyesight, so he wasn't going into the military. But during that time, he developed a process for taking sulfur out of crude oil, which was his contribution to the war effort because it allowed the airplanes to run hotter and longer without carboning. So I said, Dad, so you got that patented, right? Yeah. What'd you get paid by Gulf Oil? And he said, I got $25. I said, Dad, that seems so meager. What's going on with that? He said, Dirk, I was paid to do the job, and the $25 was not significant because I was well taken care of by my job and my salary. So that's the type of person he is.
Mm. What kind of husband was he? What was the dynamic between him and your mom?
Well, I think it's one of the really beautiful things, but I saw him throughout my life be such a good partner for Mom. Mom was so thoughtful of others, and Dad, who did a lot of traveling in his business, but they always found time to be able to create. I'm one of 7, so we all benefited from I thought it was Ozzie and Harriet life because it was so beautiful, and their love, and in particularly Mom's later life, she was dealing with dementia, and to see Dad, the captain of industry, be such a caring person for Mom. Mom died about 10 years before Dad passed. They both were the same age. Dad was born June 18th, 1921, and on his 50th birthday, Mom and Dad, but Dad says over the mic, this is the best birthday present I've ever had, seeing Judy and Dirk's marriage. So they created a wonderful partnership, but it was all about family and faith, and their commitment to both of those was inspirational.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to you and how you have lived out some of the most prominent values that your dad held, and how you're still trying to maybe make a more perfect, let's say, version of that, where you're still working on it. And take it where you will. Which one you want to go with first?
Okay, the first one I will say, I was blessed to have had my father inspire me. He learned investments having gone through the engineering rigor. But he supported me because he saw my interest early in investing to go after that as my career. But I look at what I was presented with, which was I'm part of the John Pitcairn clan, him having established it as an entrepreneur, the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company in 1883. In 1923, my grandfather, one of his three, but the eldest son, convinced his two brothers to start the Pitcairn family office in 1923. Well, when I got my turn, I liquidated the holding company that was started in 1923 and then charted the course for turning Pitcairn from a single-family office representing one family to the thriving multifamily office today, helping more than 100 other multi-generational families transition through the generations all around the globe. So I was inspired by him to do whatever I thought was right. He trusted me at an early age, and the very fact that I had his support to so transition Pitcairn from its single focus on the Pitcairn family, but because they're members of the small faith, they were always committed to the philanthropies of education and faith around the globe of societies. And that was important to him, it was important to my grandfather, and I inherited that. So I've worked diligently to make the operations of the faith successful, and I'm really happy that the Bernathen College today is pointing to a university of the future, and I've been part of that. So, yes, it was in the blood of the Pitcairn family, and me being a member of that family, it was sort of logical, but I feel that I've been encouraged in so many aspects of my life to be a change agent for the good, an entrepreneur in my own right. And I've appreciated that support from the family, the broader family, and most importantly, my dad, who was my biggest cheerleader.
And what do you feel was so beautiful about your dad that you're still kind of trying to live into, right? You haven't you're not at the end yet, so you still have time for growth and expansion and improvement. And what's sort of still being held out to you as a beacon from him and his legacy that you're still trying to grow into?
Well, I think he was so supportive at the time where I was the leadership that set the post out in the future for going through this transition from a single-family office to a multifamily office. That is not an easy transition. And I didn't recognize it at first, but our family, who was going through this transition, went from being called family to becoming clients and owners, and they hadn't ever worried about that before. And so, yes, they saw over time that the services were only going to get better to the extent that we were successful and we were meeting the needs of other families. However, that wasn't an easy transition. So that's still going on, but I can still hear him say, Dirk, that is going to be what possibly allows Pitcairn to be a 7th, 8th, and 9th generation family, what you've done. So there's still a lot to do. I think you know that I've just one of the only good things I can think of to come out of the pandemic was I've had a book in me for a long time. And I finally said, sitting right here in the man cave, Dirk, it's time for you to quit procrastinating and write it. So that came out of that, and it came right at a time because Pitcairn, having launched its family office in 1923, my book was in print in November of last year when we hit our 100th anniversary. That's a pretty special milestone.
That's incredible. That is incredible. What an incredible achievement. How did it feel to finally hold that book in your hand?
Awesome. And just quickly on that, I'm part of a number of leadership groups, and Vistage, I think, networks more than 35,000 CEOs around the globe. So they have a tremendous resource center. So when I thought about getting off of being in the procrastination mode, I knew that I needed a ghostwriter. So I interviewed 5 different references from Vistage. And the last one who I picked said, Dirk, you know what? You can find a ghostwriter anywhere. But if you want a general contractor, you're a first-time author that can go from concept to something that you're proud to see on a coffee table, I'm your person. And he's more than delivered on his end of the bargain, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this year, every year at StoryKeep, we pick a theme for the year, a kind of a slogan and a theme. And this year is "Don't Miss the Boat," because so many people procrastinate on many things that they care about deeply. One of them being recording family stories. And when I heard about sort of this moment that you had decided to wrestle procrastination down to the ground and finally get all of what's in your head and in your heart into a book, I was delighted to talk to someone in this moment where so much of our focus is about not missing the boat, and you didn't miss the boat. You made it happen.
Well, and your storyline for StoryKeep about importance of mentors, what I like about this book is that I've cataloged all the people throughout my career, and most importantly, my dad. So I'm trying to give back to all the people that believed in me and have helped me. And I just came back from Chicago, where I was part of another meeting of advisors to family systems around the globe called the Collaboration for Flourishing Families. And that was started by Jay Hughes, who is a fantastic author on the subject of families of multi-generational wealth. So this book was an opportunity to be a resource guide and a giving back, and to capture some of the stories and the lessons that I've been so fortunate to have over the years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about what is in the book and what people can look forward to. As a last question, I love, first of all, I love that your dad's mom was a portrait artist and you have a portrait of your dad behind you. It's kind of, I don't know, it's like very meta. I love it.
I hadn't ever thought of that. That is great.
Right? And so I wonder what he was thinking as he was getting this portrait painted of himself. I wonder if he thought about his mom, while that, or receiving it, what he thought.
Yeah.
But if, I guess your dad, he never got to come into your man cave, did he? Into this space?
He did once or twice, actually.
He did once or twice.
Yeah.
So that's great. So if as a final question to you, if you had the opportunity on this fine day to have your dad walk through the door and come sit in this wonderful, spot with you, what do you think you would want to say to him or ask him today?
one of the things I'd ask him is, how's Mom?
Yeah.
They modeled such a beautiful marriage. I'm trying to do that. And I've got 4 great kids. They're all productive members of society, all have great spouses and great grandkids. So he would want to know how they're doing.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure of it. Dirk, it's been a total pleasure and meaningful to spend time with you. So thank you for joining me and sharing a little bit about your dad with me.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I had the opportunity to capture his influence on my life in this book, but this is just another form. So thank you.